Hello and welcome to another episode of the Sumer Sports Show. I am your host, Parker Fleming, filling in as I am on all summer long on Wednesdays. I'm here joined by my colleague and my friend, Tej Seth. Tej, how's it going today?
Great. Yeah, this is, one of the things that make us feel really lucky to do this job, to be able to talk to both of you today. I'm very excited.
I feel very honored that I have a situation where I can say, hey, I'm going to podcast after work hours, so I'm going to take a nap this afternoon. It's nice that it kind of balances out. Didn't actually get to do that today, but nice to know it could work out. We are continuing this summer our series of interviewing just smart analytical people, our friends, our colleagues, our heroes across the internet, and we have a guest today that I'm excited to talk to, Bill Connelly of ESPN. Bill, I was going to ask you before we started, and I didn't. What is your official title at ESPN now? Is it college stats guru, general numbers man?
Well, we have a full department of that. So I think I just go by staff writer. They placated me. They have a spot for SP plus, but I'm just staff writer, ESPN.com. Which is good because that allows me to do a bunch of stuff that none of my Twitter followers care about, and write about tennis and soccer and everything else, because I'm just a staff writer. Like, it's part of my job.
Yeah. And you don't have to get bogged too down. You can do your very narrow slice of the numbers, and no one's like, hey, Bill, can you go pull this query for me? Or can you,
That's
you
right.
You get to focus on that.
Pure writing job. It's great.
Awesome. Well, we're certainly glad to have you here today. We'll talk a little bit about you, a little bit about college football analytics and why that's different, and how you think about it, and then hopefully have some time to get into some 2023 teams and talk about some predictions there. So should be fun. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started there. Make sure you are following the show. Make sure you're following Sumer Sports on Twitter. And I'm already going to start plugging this because it's going to matter. You got to sign up for the website. We're collecting emails. Gonna have some really, Tej, tell me if I'm speaking out of turn here. We're gonna have some really cool stuff that's like at the intersection of some AI and some stats content in a newsletter soonish. Like, I think in the nearest future, the sky is the limit for what we can potentially do out of this newsletter that we're kind of building, and again, of course, on the site. So make sure you're signed up there. When that comes out, I think you should be seeing a link imminently from us about that. Other than that, I think we're all good, and we can turn our attention to Bill and kind of get things started. So, Bill, we'll kind of work backwards from your from where you are to kind of where you got started. You've been at ESPN for 3 years now.
Four. 2019. So, if we don't count 2020 as a year, and that's fine if we don't, then yeah, 3, but 4.
Yeah,
really.
I remember. You've done a million interviews, but you came on my TCU podcast like August of 2020, and we were just like, how do you project it? Like, I don't know, man. Like, what's going to happen here? And yeah, fun times. Okay, so you've been at ESPN for 4 years. Before that, you were at SB Nation. ESPN brought you on. They're hosting SP Plus. They're letting you write about all sorts of things, both football and others. How did you get started at SB Nation?
They didn't have a Missouri blog, is how I got started at SB Nation. It's early, 2007. I've grown tired of the Missouri message boards. I start like a blogger.com site so my friends can talk about stuff. And over that summer, I start looking for off-season content because as a blogger, you get to know the calendar very well. And by like April, Missouri's basketball team was terrible. They were done. It was like, well, what are we writing about for the next 4 months? And so that was when I started kind of fiddling with numbers. I love baseball stats, hate baseball, love baseball stats. Googled, college football analytics, and Google just kind of shrugged its shoulders. And like that was kind of, Brian Fermo had just gotten started at Football Outsiders, and he was doing drive-based stuff, but I was thinking about the equivalent of at-bats and OPS and stuff from baseball. So I was pretty good at scraping stuff and dumping it into Excel sheets, and I just started dumping play-by-play into Excel sheets. But then, that was, spring, summer of 2007, but I started to realize that, I was following quite a few SB Nation sites. They didn't really have, their college unit was just kind of coming together. They only had a couple of Big 12 sites at that point. So I contacted whatever that contact address was, and they kind of paired me up with another guy, a younger guy who had just started at Mizzou, Ross Taylor, now Clemson's SID, by the way, because that's where the bridge, the Rock M coaching tree is kind of interesting right now. but they paired us up to start Rock M Nation, and we started in 2007. And then, so from there in 2011, I branched out, did a footballstudyhall.com site, started full-time in the fall of 2011. We had a kid, and I basically said the only way I can continue doing this is if I do it full-time and don't have a separate full-time job. And they somehow said, okay. So, so that's a good, have kids and, make them, come up with ultimatums regarding your kids, and it works out great for everybody. But that's kind of 2011 started full-time, and it just kind of grew from there.
Yeah, use your kids as bargaining chips. That's the one lesson to take away from the Consumer Sports Podcast today, everyone.
It's worked 100% of the time that I've seen it attempted. That's all I can really say.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to get involved in the kid situation and start using them as bargaining chips. You play like that, but yeah, I really like how like so many of us, Parker with TCU and you with Missouri, like so many of us get into college football and especially like the analytics side of things just from being a fan at the very beginning, and I think it's really cool. So when you were growing up a Missouri fan and you were a student there, when was the first time you really started to see like, oh, okay, I can start to apply numbers to like these games that I'm going to and these games that I'm watching?
It was funny because it just wasn't really a thought in football for a long time. I mean, I knew Football Outsiders existed, obviously, and some of it had bled through, but that was pro stuff. And I followed NFL, but I was college football first by far. And if I'm watching a Missouri game from the stands and I've just got my fists clenched, just, wanting to yell like push or whatever, like I'm not thinking about numbers or I'm thinking analytically, I'm thinking emotionally for the most part. But it was funny. I mean, when I started kind of fiddling with this stuff, I found the success rate definition at Football Outsiders on the NFL side, kind of fiddled with it in a way that I thought made more sense for me, for what I was doing, came up with an explosiveness kind of thing, started playing around with what seemed to matter. Then it really did kind of bleed into how I watched the game. And that's good because I'm in my mid 40s now. I don't want to still be just yelling random curse words from the stands at Missouri games. But it really did. I started to understand what mattered and when. I think I got a much better feel for like early on, like watch the line, see which way the push is going early on. And, even if the quarterback throws a bunch of completions on the first drive, was he under pressure doing it? Maybe that'll probably add up later, stuff like that. It all it affected the way I was watching things. But before I started playing with numbers, I think I just watched the game as raggedly emotional as anybody else. And it didn't really come into play.
Yeah. And that's funny to hear, like everybody does have the origin story and the, like, I just wanted to know more and there wasn't an answer. So I made an answer.
Yeah.
And so Bill, I'd love to talk about, kind of your process from, all right, I'm writing a little bit, doing this blog. It's the off season. I'm going to start thinking about numbers. I think I've seen like, you had a pretty sickos basketball metric at one point, right? It was like possession and it was a pretty cool ratio, but it was like 9 things in concert.
Yeah,
so numbers for multiple sports.
Yeah, one of the things I started doing with basketball, there were a lot of, this was like the late 2000s, early 2010s, where there were you had like little game score metrics where points are worth X and rebounds are worth X and blah, 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 blah. And I started to fiddle with that because I had to, I had to write. I had content to generate. And after every Missouri basketball game, I would spit out kind of a box score type thing. But yeah, I was calling it adjusted game score. Basically what it was, this was not meant to ever see ESPN or anything else. It was just basically taking a couple of the game score definitions that I thought made the most sense. And if they add up to 59 points at the end of the game, but your team actually scored 70, I just kind of redistribute those 59 proportionally to where it adds up to 70. And it was very, very, very basic. But between that and what I was calling, I think the other thing I kind of fiddled with that I might have done before I saw it anywhere else was what I was calling ball control index, because Missouri had Mike Anderson as its head coach, full court press, not 40 minutes of hell, fastest 40 minutes is what he called it. And during every single broadcast, the announcers all had like the same talking points, one of which was like, they're focused on turnovers or steals. Steals are turnovers that stay in play or whatever. And I started to realize, like, instead of assist to turnover ratio, we should be looking at like assists plus steals. Yeah, I think it was just assists plus steals divided by turnover, something like that, to give steals more value. And Missouri, sure enough, was winning that every single time because of the style of play. They were also getting crushed on the boards because of their style of play. But it all kind of, I think those were it was just kind of for whatever sport we were writing about, come up with a weird little analytical approach to it and see what sticks. I don't think the game score metric was very sound, but I kind of like ball control index at least.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's so interesting because that's, I imagine I'm going to explicitly ask you this, but I'm going to answer it first. The birth of SP Plus was like, hey, I know these things are important in the college football. I'm going to track them for Missouri. But if I want to see how Missouri is going to do against their opponents, then I need to track how their opponents are doing. But then to know how good the opponents are, I've got to know how good everyone that they're playing. And before you know it, hey, I've got 130 teams in this metric. So when is this is kind of like the question of like, what's your first memory of as a child? What's SP Plus's first memory as a child? When did you first kind of come together?
Yeah. So when we hit the 2007 season, again, I'm scraping this into Excel probably before work, or occasionally at work. You can't prove it, but that was, I think during that 2007 season, I was able to keep up with the Big 12 games, basically. So I had Missouri stats, all my super basic, I guess, success rate. It was the same success rate measure that I use now. But the equivalent point thing that I came up with was basically just whatever I could glean from Big 12 stuff. It wasn't all that great. And so any sort of opponent adjustments didn't really happen during the year. But then in the off season, it probably took months because I had no programming kind of background. It was scraping in Excel sheets. And I think probably March, I had finished the 2007 season, something like that. And then, so from there, I was able to start making my first attempts at opponent adjustments and kind of working back through the 2007 season and seeing like what seemed to be more predictive from start to finish of the season. And came up with what was probably a pretty bad S&P plus metric because it was supposed to be OPS, of course. So the on-base percentage part of success rate efficiency, the slugging percentage was equivalent points. So that was my stab at that. But since that was that was pretty much it that existed on a play-by-play basis for college football, I got Aaron Schatz's attention. I was able to start writing at Outsiders that fall in 2008. But I still was doing this by myself and couldn't use any sort of opponent adjusted stuff during the season. So that first season, it was basically like I do my Big 12 stuff. I'd pick a team to do their games or whatever and just do a little at a time. I haven't gone back and looked at those 2008 columns in a very long time. I'm assuming they're not amazing. But by I think probably 2009, I got in touch with the guy at cfbstats.com. Marty Kuvalon was his name. I think he ended up with Sports Source Analytics. I think that was that tie. But basically, he was doing this for his own website. He wasn't doing any sort of analysis with it. We kind of became kindred spirits. I didn't have time to do that part, but I loved to write about it. So he started sending me his data weekly, and I was able to then generate SP Plus on a Sunday morning and go from there. It took a couple of years though before it was any sort of major, because I always say I'm a writer first. So any programming background I now have was just so I could do stuff for SP Plus or whatever else. And that took a few years to really get going.
Yeah. The 2007 season is a heck of a season to start, doing something like that.
It's a heck of a season to start a Missouri blog. That's for sure.
Yeah, that too. But yeah, I mean, that's really cool. That's cool to see how your process evolved over time. So yeah, so once you get going, you're including returning production, you're including recruiting, and you're including recent history in your makeup of S&P Plus. Like I assume things were going pretty well until like the transfer portal got really popular, right? So can you kind of talk about like when the transfer portal started being used more and more by these players, how it kind of affected how you had to approach your ratings from a different perspective?
Yeah. So 2019 was SP Plus's best year. Like it nailed 2019, did good against the spread, even though the spread was starting to evolve and get a lot better. Whatever its absolute error average was it would have been like top 3 at prediction tracker. It killed. It was best year on record. And then everything just kind of got stupid from that point forward. And now I'm playing catch up like everybody else, I guess. But yeah, so Well, I mean, first of all, the recent history part, like figuring out what the heck to do with 2020 to begin with, is its own humongous issue to itself. But yeah, right around 2021, I guess, is when transfers started to tick up pretty consistently. And what I was doing, I mean, I don't remember the first year I kind of unveiled my returning production idea, but it basically came from the fact that I have these preview spreadsheets that I always use for writing previews and just to have on hand. And I maintain everybody's rosters and all this stuff. And I realized that, I could at some point go back to these sheets and start looking at like, okay, let's record everybody's returning quarterback yards and everybody's rushing and blah, 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 everything I had available. And I finally got around to doing that and just dumping it into, running regressions and seeing what correlated the best to the change from year to year. And that worked pretty well. And I had a really stupid, simple way of handling transfers because since, each team had 2 or 3 of them, you just take the player's stats at his old school and just kind of mash it into the numerator and denominator at the new school. And there you go. Like, if you lose your starting quarterback, but you bring in a transfer quarterback, then you probably return like 50% of production from the previous year. And that kind of, it wasn't perfect, but it worked. And then USC signed 20 transfers last year or whatever it was. And LSU signed 17 or whatever. And all these schools started absolutely loading up. And my kind of method didn't really seem to make a lot of sense. So what I've done for 2023 is try to lean heavily into whatever I trust from 2022. Not just immediately say whatever the correlations were last year, let's just do it, but trying to ramp that part of it up a decent amount to where transfers, basically a transfer or an overall recruiting haul from a given year, this first year for 2023, it's going to be almost all transfers is what counts for your projections this year. Then next year, the recruiting class itself kicks in to a certain degree. So, Georgia doesn't get much credit for what it signed this year because the guys they signed this year, you're not going to see many of them on the field in the fall. But LSU gets a ton of credit. Next year, the fact that Georgia signed 28 5-stars or whatever it was they signed this year, that's going to start mattering a whole bunch and kicking in and that. So that's it really is like when I first started all this, I had 5, 6, 7, 8 years at least of kind of prior data to use and make projections off of. Now you kind of have to make semi conclusions based off 1 year, and I hate it. and you combine that with 2020 not knowing what to do with that data anyway, and it's not nearly as comfortable a situation, I would think.
Yeah, certainly less linear when you factor in, and I feel like there's kind of a split in paths to success between the Alabamas and I think the coming up the LSUs and the Georgias and the TCUs and the Baylors and the Cincinnatis that have had success recently. Of some teams are looking at get to an elite level by whatever means necessary, get across that threshold, almost like a Fermi paradox of college football, if you will, get past the great filter, then maintain that success. Whereas other teams are saying, let me just bounce on the ceiling every 3 to 4 years. Let me just get these guys in. Don't let the floor get too low and then try to hit there. So it's interesting because you do have almost like a bifurcation of these types of teams. And then, a transfer to one school might not mean as much as a lower rated transfer to another school who's going to immediately plug in and be better. And how do you manually account for that? Like, how do you systematically account for that? It's certainly an open question and certainly something that's confusing. And I think something that's going to be really, really hard for analysts and even fans to reconcile. Like, do I get excited about this 4-star who transferred from Alabama, or is that a signal that he's not good and it doesn't matter that he's a 4-star?
Yeah, I mean, coaches will say like there's every transfer has a red flag of some sort, and I mean that's whatever. That's not entirely true. But coaches like to think that, but they're still taking chances on like 18 or 20 transfers. You got guys like Lane Kiffin doing it when they're not like first year. Bringing in a bunch of transfers in your first year makes all the sense in the world. Like Bud Elliott, my friend, my former SB Nation coworker, now at 247. He was starting to piece together like these guys come in with the mid-December signing day. You get hired and then you sign a bunch of guys that the last coach got commitments from a week into your job. 2/3 of those guys are going to transfer, and it's just kind of a mess. So why would you do it in the first place? And granted, now Deion Sanders has completely changed that whole paradigm with what he's tried to do. But generally, if you load up on transfers your first year, it makes perfect sense. If you're still doing it in like year 5, I don't really know. At some point, I think the returns diminish quite a bit because you're pushing a bunch of guys out for also, and there's no sense of culture whatsoever because there are no underclassmen aside from a few in the starting lineup. And so I do think, it becomes this kind of curve as you go along. In theory, if things are going well, you take a ton of transfers at first, and then you take a few less every year after that. And I think that's what we'll see from guys like Brian Kelly, who has done a ton of transfer work here out of the gate, but he probably can't keep that up if he wants to succeed. He needs to start leaning on the 5-year guys more. 4-year guys, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting because especially about Dion, because you think about Kansas's issues over the last 10 years are a lot because Mangino went super JUCO heavy in the aughts, what do we call it?
Well,
Lots
yeah,
of
it was
ends.
there.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, there was it was Charlie Weiss.
Sorry, Mangino. Weiss came in after. Right.
In 2013 to 15, somewhere in there, where he was at Kansas for a year and talking about we're going to do this the right way and we're going to build from the ground up, and then a year and he's like, man, this roster is terrible. I'm going to sign 18 JUCOs and see if we can do something with it. And it of course failed. And the next guy came in and everybody had transferred out, and what's his name? Beatty. He came in after him.
David Beatty looked at me at Big 12 Media Days and said there were 38 guys in the room when I walked in, and 7 of them stood up and walked out. And you're like, dude, yeah, you can't put together a football team. That's not not gonna happen.
I didn't love that hire. I didn't think he really ever was kind of built to do well in that job anyway. But he never had a chance to begin with. Yeah. Because among other things, one of the most underrated factors of how everybody's building rosters right now is they got rid of the 25-man limit. And they said it was temporary. I don't see how you can possibly bring it back in the transfer portal era unless you want every single roster to have 55 guys on it. But I am curious if they try to put some limit back with what Deion Sanders has now done. I am curious if they try to reinstall some sort of limit, even if it's 40 or something in a given year. And I would almost support it because I think what Deion Sanders is doing is going to work to some degree. Number one, they can't get worse. So of course it's going to make them better to whatever degree. And he's going to recruit it well enough probably to at least get them to 7-8 wins in a year or something. And I'm horrified by the standard that sets, when we've been saying for years, you don't pick the coach, you pick the school. Well, now the school's going to boot you if the coach gets fired. The new guy's going to come in and boot all but 5 guys. And that sucks. Colorado's a good school. And now, a bunch of guys got pretty much the entire roster got cut. And they got to continue their education there if they chose to. And 4 guys did, but it just sucks. And I don't want that to be the standard. And I think it might be now.
Yeah. Well,
I think the 25-man limit's really interesting. Oh, go ahead, Parker.
No.
I was going to say, I think the 25-man limit's really interesting, right? Because it was created because of Ole Miss in 12 years ago, I think at this point when Houston you signed 40 recruits in one class, and now you kind of have this coming back again where it's all right, Brian Kelly or Deion Sanders can just spam the transfer portal, and if it leads to a national championship for LSU, if LSU goes out and wins the national championship this year, then I think you might start to see some programs complaining and asking for some type of limit on that. But as long as these coaches, especially at these bigger programs that need these types of transfer players are getting it, I think that there'll be more hush about it until it goes against one of them.
It's really funny to me because what we've learned is coaches are going to game the system because the 25-man limit was in place because coaches were oversigning, cutting guys. It was meant to protect the players that they weren't going to get run off the roster, even though everybody a coach gets to the end of spring ball and has 89 scholarships accounted for, so they got to have hard conversations with 4 guys to get down to 85 or whatever. But that's still pretty small. But yeah, so the limits were to protect guys. Now it feels like getting rid of the limits protects guys because if you got teams with 60 scholarship players because they can't sign more, suddenly that's 25 guys who aren't getting a scholarship to play FBS football, and that sucks. So you can't have a limit, but if you don't have a limit, then suddenly new coaches are going to cut 60 players, and it just kind of, no matter what, the coaches are going to rig the system to a certain degree because they get paid a lot of money to win and they want to win, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, well, I'm certain we'll see a wake of Leroy Jenkins style copycats of Dion if he has even just a modicum of success, which
Yep.
um, might be entertaining, but also will be certainly reckless overall. Got to break in here halfway and do a little bit of an ad read. Speaking of being reckless, something you don't want to be reckless with is your personal grooming. Manscaped has all the tools for any kind of grooming you might need. It's a great gift for fathers, for brothers, for uncles, for people in your life that might need it. It's a great gift for yourself to make sure that you're taking care of the grooming you need to. You can get a discount on anything Manscaped by going to manscaped.com, typing in code SUMER, and they will get you taken care of with all of your personal grooming needs. Check that out, code SUMER at manscaped.com. Tage, we've got Bill for a fixed amount of time. I had like 9 or 10 more things. I was like, let's go down rabbit trails. I feel like we should talk about 2023 season. You okay with that, Audible?
Yeah, we should.
Do
This is what it's all about, right? Is talking about next year.
The game never goes how you think it's going to go.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, especially like this time in the summer months, June, July, like this is the time to start, talking yourself into UCLA being a national championship contender or something like that. So let's get into it. I think this question was really good from Mikey Lowe here in the chat first, before we get into talking about actual teams. Bill, how do you see this the new clock rules affecting the overall scoring this year? I'm very curious to see how it plays out.
Yeah, it'll go down. I mean, I think there will be fewer plays, therefore it will go down. I have not decided yet how I'm going to account for that. I guess I have till August with the last SP Plus projections release. But yeah, I mean, to one degree or another, there will be fewer plays, especially in the first and third quarter, and therefore there will be fewer possessions. Therefore, there will be fewer points. I am very curious. I mean, I have some ideas, obviously, but I'm very curious how the sports books handle that right out of the gate. How much they adjust those over-unders to account for that. But yeah, I mean, we wanted faster games, and we're going to get faster games by eliminating a few plays, basically at the end of the first and third quarters.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I'm sure there'll be some interesting heterogeneity with how the one, I was going to say triple teams, but that's kind of dying because of legislation again to change the blocks. So maybe some of that'll change as well. We won't get to see how the triple teams might fare differently with fewer plays or how the variance plays out. But I think that's going to be an interesting kind of natural experiment. And why wouldn't they change more variables in college football? They did it with the BCS every year. I feel like we don't need a consistent sample over a couple of years to try to dial anything in. I think that's a great question. Thanks, Mikey Lowe. Bill, the first question is chalky. It's just the one we've got to address. What's stopping Georgia and Kirby Smart from the three-peat?
New quarterback. That's the number one thing I can do if we, because this is the time of year we're always like, okay, chaos. Everybody start chanting it at the same time. Let's go. The best opportunity we have for chaos is the fact that looking at my SP Plus projections, number 1, number 2, and number 4, plus number 6 and number 8, all have new starting quarterbacks. And, the other ones that return their guys, Michigan, Cade McNamara is top 20 quarterback for sure. I'm not sure where his ceiling is. I haven't really decided that yet either, but they might kind of be stuck with a very good quarterback as opposed to a Heisman level quarterback. And we don't know if the Heisman level quarterbacks are going to be on pretty flawed teams, USC or Washington or North Carolina or whatever we're talking about. It's kind of, in that sense, it's kind of interesting. Then you remind yourself that Georgia just won a national title with a former walk-on back-to-back. And now they've got, their choice of 5-star guys to plug into the lineup. So I'm not going to cry for them too much. I don't love him hiring Mike Bobo as offensive coordinator. I can talk myself into a scenario where they go a little too retrograde here and there. And, I don't want to go too far with that, because if he just takes the playbook that he inherited from Monken and calls plays from it, it's going to work pretty well. Mike
Bobo is salivating to put like 7 tight ends on the field with like just the overwhelming talent advantage. Mike Bobo's like, dude, we could run it 60 times a game and win by 30. Like, I don't know why I wouldn't try that.
Yeah, and that's he very well might, and that could cost them at one point or another. And it's funny, like 10 years ago, I loved Mike Bobo. I was calling him one of the most underrated coordinators in the sport because Georgia fans hated him so much when he was clearly very good. They wanted him to run the ball more when he ran the ball a lot, and also through like they had a great run with Aaron Murray there throwing vertically as well. It was a really fun offense. But I don't really know if he's kept up with the times all that much. He certainly, some of the things he said as South Carolina's offensive coordinator a couple of years ago, I don't remember what it was, but we don't need to throw that much. Running the ball accomplishes whatever that quote was. It wasn't great, but again, if he just takes the last guy's playbook, it'll probably work out just fine for everybody. So I can't. That's the best I can do. New quarterback. Teams like LSU really putting together an interesting combination of veteran transfer, blue chip talent, and return guys, and having a top 10 class coming in. There could be some interesting combinations of experience there. They do have to play at Tennessee. And granted, if that's like their only hard game, and if they lose that one, they'll still get into the playoffs. So maybe that doesn't matter, but random games can trip you up. So it's not a given. I'm fine. It's definitely not a given, but I was, when I was updating SP Plus for the May release, I started to notice like Ohio State and Michigan were both kind of trickling toward Georgia a little bit. I'm like, no. Georgia has to be number one. And they just barely like 0.3 points. They're still number one.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really interesting point with the quarterbacks and the teams, right? Like last year, CJ Stroud on Ohio State, best team, best quarterback. Bryce Young on Alabama, really, really good team and good quarterback. And Hendon Hooker, Tennessee. And then this year, all the top quarterbacks, if you were to just rank the quarterbacks that we have, like USC is 7th in S&P Plus. They have your projected 39th defense. Even though they've gotten some transfers in, they're still not looking at that good of a defense. Washington is 17th with Michael Penix Jr. and Bo Nix at Oregon 11th and Drake May and North Carolina lower. So I think that's the really interesting thing about this year is when you look at Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, and Tennessee, all in the top 6, all breaking in new quarterbacks. Penn State at 8, also breaking in a new quarterback. And we talked a little bit about this on Twitter. Like, do you see that could lead to more uncertainty than usual? Or do you think some of these programs are such well-oiled machines at this point where they should be able to sustain success throughout different quarterbacks?
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, for sure, like coaching changes and quarterback changes are how the power structure changes in the sport historically. Like that's every single time Alabama gets a new starting quarterback, it's a chance for Alabama to fall off. Then you remember that 4 of Nick Saban's 6 national titles in Tuscaloosa came with a new starting quarterback, and a 5th was when they subbed in a freshman in the national title game. So it doesn't have to mean anything. It doesn't have to mean anything other than Georgia and Alabama are still just going to push everybody around or whatever. But it is an opportunity for a drop-off. And I think with what we've seen with Alabama this year, I mean, they won a national title with Jake Coker in 2015. So they can certainly do whatever they want in this regard. But they had a really, really, really elite defense in 2016. Well, when they did that, they really haven't had that since 2017, I guess. So if they are as uncertain as it sure seems like like Jalen Milroe can run the crap out of the ball. We learned that in a very small sample last year, but he was also a pretty mediocre throwing the ball. Tyler Buchner, we obviously didn't get a huge sample with him at Notre Dame, but it was very up and very, very down. I thought in spring ball, it was the best case scenario for them is if Ty Simpson, the redshirt freshman, just ran away with the job completely, and he didn't. So if, an old school Alabama run game with Jalen Milroe and McClellan and whoever else in the backfield, that could absolutely work, especially if their defense improves. But they haven't been like top 3 Alabama defense in a while. I didn't love the Kevin Steele defensive coordinator hire either. Not that it matters when you're Nick Saban, who the coordinator is, but it feels like there are more ifs for Alabama this year, and quarterback is a humongous one, but it's not the only one. And it's kind of an interesting place to be. I said, I'm bringing all this doubt about a guaranteed top 5 team that just might not be number 1 or as close to number 1 as normal.
Yeah. And I mean, their floor is what we saw like last year, right? Like their floor is Sugar Bowl beating the heck out of a conference champion. So I mean, it's interesting because like you think about like NCAA 14 Dynasty, right? You can get that thing cooking and there are no shocks. There are like no negative shocks. You can always just kind of keep it going. And the new quarterback and the coordinator turnover are kind of the new shocks. And Alabama's been able to navigate that. Kirby Smart's getting his Saban moment this year with kind of all of his coordinators having turned over now. And can he do it again on top of, extra personnel and all that? But it's interesting to see. That's really the only way a shock can enter the system that can derail a program. And we haven't seen it necessarily do that yet. I want to take us a little bit of a turn here, Bill, and I'm looking at your college football S&P plus rating. SP plus. Long live the ampersand.
That's right.
Right, P.
Cease and desist.
Yeah. Don't come after us. SP plus rankings, and I am noticing that you top 26, top 30, maybe or so. We have no group of 5 teams.
Yep.
And I can think about some explanations for that, and I could pontificate, but I want to ask you. What should I read into the fact that you don't have a clear and obvious number 1 G5 team, and that the level set of G5 seems to be substantially lower than that of the Power 5 in terms of those tier 2, tier 3 teams?
Yeah, it breaks my heart. Like now, I had people on Twitter like, "Oh, SB Nation Bill liked the G5, and now ESPN Bill doesn't."
That ESPN money comes in, and forget
right.
the G5 schools, man.
Understanding that I still love them and want them as high as possible. The 2 explanations I've come up with here. Number one, there's a hint with the returning production numbers themselves. When I ran the averages in May. The rank in terms of average returning production per conference was SEC, ACC, Big 12, Big 10, Pac-12. The P5 being the top 5, followed by Conference USA, MAC, Mountain West, and then the 2 that got most plucked, AAC and Sun Belt. I think now I don't count FCS stats in returning production, and a lot of the schools in these conferences got some pretty solid FCS talent. I don't count it because it wasn't ever predictive for me a long time ago, and I got to figure out if it still is. But that's kind of if the portal is having an effect in any way. It's not necessarily coalescing the talent at certain schools because Georgia, Clemson, Alabama aren't using the portal much as a whole, but it could be coalescing the talent a little bit at the P5 level. So the returning production aspect, the way I've been doing the formula anyway, really ended up favoring the P5 this year because a lot of the stars at the G5 level transferred. The other part is, 4 of the best G5 programs or 3 plus BYU, I guess, just became power conference programs. Not that Cincinnati, Cincinnati has some questions to answer. There might be only top 50 this year. UCF is probably, I like UCF, but maybe only top 40. And then BYU fell off last year. Houston is confusing. But still, like those are 3 or 4 of the most reliable G5 or mid-major programs. They're not G5 anymore. Now you're looking at Tulane and Troy and SMU and whatever the order actually is. Those would have, in normal circumstances, been top 10 G5 programs. Now they're the best G5 programs. So that's another obvious factor as well, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When we were prepping for this show, I wrote down Cincinnati as a G5 team, and Parker was like, "Remember that they transferred?" I was like, "Oh yeah, we have the 40." The Big 12 is really interesting this year because it's the year before Alabama, Texas and Oklahoma transfer to the SEC and have to start playing all like the Alabamas and the Georgias, and then you have like these really good group of 5 teams for a while that are joining the conference. So it's like a mix of 2 different things this year, which could be cool. So, looking outside like the top couple teams, do you have a sleeper in particular that either SP plus or even like a team that you're higher than SP plus and like as a team that could make a run to make the playoff that like a lot of people aren't talking about right now?
Well, I always struggle to come up with here's who you should watch for kind of, or this is the team that will blah, blah, blah. It's just teams I'm curious about, like things that make me intrigued. And I want to see, like, they still have like 3 ifs that they have to answer right or whatever. But a team like Penn State that was better than everybody that played last year, except the 2 playoff teams they played against and lost to, Ohio State and Michigan. If Ohio State has a new quarterback, and Penn State also has a new quarterback, but has the golden boy quarterback that they've been ready for a long time, and they return a ton elsewhere, their defense should be top 10 or very close to it because they have a lot of talent, and Manny Diaz is a very good defensive coordinator. You start to realize like there's a lot of pluses there, and they really were I think because they lost to Ohio State and Michigan again, people stopped paying attention to them after that. They were really good down the stretch. So the fact that they're projected 8th, they're very, very close to being, what is it? They're 1.5 points from the top 5, basically. I think they still need that quarterback to hit. Drew Aller has to be excellent, and they have a couple of replacements to make in the skill core. But they've got loads and loads and loads of potential. And I'm really curious about them, really curious about LSU, but that doesn't really count. I think they've been hyped enough to where you can't say they're underrated or dark horse or whatever. They're going to be borderline preseason top 5. So that one doesn't really count. But just looking through the list, insert whichever Big 12 team wins all their close games. It's going to change every single year. It was Baylor and OSU, then it was TCU and K-State. Now it'll be, if it's boring, it'll be Texas and Oklahoma, which will stink, but they lost a ton of close games last year, and that usually flips to some degree. I'm much more interested in like a Texas Tech UCF Big 12 title game, but I'm not gonna bet a lot of money on that.
We paid Bill to say that because we knew our engagement would go up. That's right. all that was. Just looking through the SP Plus list, I mean, you start to gravitate towards like what are just the super talented teams that have obvious flaws but tons of talent. So if you want to say that Bobby Petrino makes A&M's offense top 30 level, well, they probably have a top 5 or 10 defense, quite potentially, and pull a couple of upsets, and there you go. I'm not going to put money on that, but it wouldn't be the most incredibly surprising thing in the world. Ole Miss is kind of just has a lot of, again, Lane Kiffin's is going to take 20 transfers a year or whatever. And if the formula ever hits just right, who knows? Otherwise, I don't know. I mean, I think there are a lot of teams that could win their conference outside of the Big Ten and SEC anyway. The Pac-12 having 6 top 30-ish teams is super intriguing. And whoever wins all the close games there, they could be in a very good position to be like 12-1 at the end of the year. But in the end, it's probably Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama who are going to vacuum up most of the odds for the title, and LSU is going to take a big pick of those too.
Yeah, I do like a lot of the teams that you mentioned there, though. Penn State, I mean, the 2 losses that you talked about, like they took Michigan late into the fourth quarter. Ohio State, they were up most of that game until Ohio State had some defensive touchdowns. So I think if variants were to break their way, they're definitely an option there as well. And then Ole Miss is really interesting because when whoever they decide on to be their QB1, they'll probably have like the best backup quarterback in the country. Right. So, you'll have to see like what Lane Kiffin exactly wants to do with who he picks the quarterback, I think will be telling. And then like what he ends up doing with them and designing the offense in a way to score, I think will be really cool to see.
Yeah, and I love, I kind of groused about him getting too many transfers earlier, but what he did in the skill core, or in the receiving core, I should say. Zachary Franklin from UTSA is awesome. Trey Harris is kind of a deep balls guy, if I remember right. Like, I don't know how that'll transfer exactly, but if they are able to kind of, last year's receiving core was good, but not quite as good. If they have kind of the 2021 level receiving core again with a really good quarterback situation, as long as that room isn't just totally toxic with 3 guys all thinking they should start or whatever. Quinshon Judkins is back at running back. Offensive line returns mostly intact and brings in transfers. You can talk yourself into a whole lot there. Defense might not ever come around enough, but they could still at least be good enough to beat anyone on the schedule, even if they're not going to beat everyone on the schedule.
Bill, want to be mindful of your time, so I know we're butting up against it here. I will ask you one last question. Have to go, just absolute sickos here. Of the 3 teams, 2 of them this year, one of them coming up next year. Jacksonville State, Sam Houston, Kennesaw State. Yes. Who is best positioned to win a major bowl game first?
Well, okay. First of all, define major. Are we talking about any or like a New Year's Six bowl?
Let's say beat a P5 team in a bowl. Because you have to be very top of the conference to make that happen. The stars kind of have to line. Let's say beat an American Athletic Conference team in the bowl.
Okay, that's probably a better. Let's see. So it probably has to be a Conference USA team because that conference is easier. Wait, did you say which? Are we talking about the brand new ones, or are we counting
the brand news? Jacksonville's. Well, I don't know. JMU was kind of hating last year. They're pretty good. I think they would clearly win that. So of the other three, Jack State, Sam Houston, and Kennesaw State.
I love what Kennesaw State does, and I think they have a system in place offensively that'll probably allow them to get to a certain level, like a higher floor maybe. But I think you need Texas talent. To Jacksonville State's going to have a really fun Rich Rod offense and no defense to speak of for the coming years. So I guess I'm going to go Sam Houston. I don't know how long Casey Keeler is going to be there, but I love Casey Keeler. It was really fun watching them win the spring national title a couple of years ago. I'm going to go. What is it? The Bearcats. I'm going to go Sam Houston.
Bearcats. Nice.
Yeah,
Bearcats with a K.
I understand.
Okay.
I understand why they can't do it, but having the FCS in the spring a couple years ago was awesome. Like having the playoffs just like right there where, you're missing football in February, March, and it was was really cool. But I mean, football is like a fall sport at the end of the day, but I wish that they could do that in a perfect world.
It was so much. I got to write like weekly Friday FCS previews through the entire spring. It was so fun. And they actually got more like subscribers and hits than I think anybody really expected them to. So that turned into me at least getting to write like FCS playoff previews in the fall. But yeah, it's I'm not able to preview, put together a really nice, whatever Wofford versus Furman preview in week 8 or anything like I was there for a year. It was great.
Yeah. I'm going to gloss over entirely the XFL slander that Tage just let happen right there about football deserving to be in the fall.
I have not been able to do it. I have not been able to get into pro spring football. There apparently has to be, I didn't know this about myself, but there apparently has to be a history for me to really get into it.
So because some of it is like just the most random guys and you're like, oh, I remember that name. It's like a stroll down memory lane, but at times it is challenging.
Yeah, I think, ask me in like 15 years if it's still going and there's an actual history with these teams, then maybe I can get myself into it. But I've not been able to do it at all.
We just like big sample sizes over here
on TV. Yeah,
that's right. You got to have priors. You got to have the big sample size. You just can't throw yourself in. You got to have a reason to here.
Yeah. This has been a great conversation, Bill. Thank you so much for your time. We're glad to have you. You can find Bill at ESPN, where the SP Plus is hosted. You can find him on Twitter at Bill's ESPN Bill C. Is there an underscore in there?
ESPN _Bill C.
ESPN _Bill C. You can check him out there. We'll tag him in the show notes and on Twitter when we post this tomorrow. For Tage Seth, I'm Parker Fleming. This has been the Sumer Sports Show Wednesday edition. We'll see you back next week. I think we've got some fun. I know the drafts get a lot of content and a lot of engagement. I think we've got a fun idea for Monday's show. So we'll be back then with more good stuff here. Go follow Bill. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube, like and share the show. And we'll catch you guys next time.